Don't feed on anyone sick, you don't feed on children, you don't feed on animals. Anything that can give you a bloodborne virus, basically, you avoid or you run past me first. Obviously, there's a lot of manipulation inherent in this, but it does actually get a lot more sinister than that. Things that some people are willing to sacrifice and give of themselves can be terrifying. It does get very, very dark, the things that the vampirism rabbit hole goes down to. Even all these years later, I will still repeat what I said at the time, which is that my biggest regret in life was that. Anything good you have in your life, if you're willing to lose it forever until you are a hollowed out husk of yourself years down the line, until there is just no part of you left. If you are, and I have to say, if you're dumb enough at this point to follow this path, there's nothing that's going to protect you. Nothing. So hello, you wonderful citizen of the internet, and welcome to a video about all things real vampire-y. This video has been inspired because over on TikTok, like, vampires in taxis has become a whole thing. Over the past month or so, there have been 2 female Lyft drivers in the United States who have both given their separate testimonials of picking up vampires and driving them around in their cabs. It's all very Interview with a Vampire. And I have so much to talk about with this, I really do. There's so many elements to the real vampire conundrum, and there's so much to talk about. But to briefly get into what happened to these 2 women, I think the thing that interested me was that although the stories were very different in certain ways, there were very strong parallels that also happened. That the first one took place in New Orleans, no surprise there, and the vampire in question was a single female, I believe redheaded, and she was very open with the taxi driver, this one. She told her that she was a vampire, and she talked a lot about different types of vampires, the kinds of energy they like to feed on, all of this kind of stuff. The second one took place in... I'm having a mental blank. It was a city. It was a city in the United States. I can't remember which one, but it wasn't New Orleans. It was somewhere else. And this taxi driver gave a lot more detail, I feel like. She picked up 4, I think they were all men, described them as having very pale, kind of just strange looking, like unnatural looking pale skin. They had different colours of hair, but all their eyes were this very pale, very clear, translucent kind of blue. And these guys did not admit to being vampires, and they didn't talk about vampire-y stuff. But where the parallels come in is that in both cases, at some point during the Lyft journey, the taxi drivers were touched on the shoulder by one of these suspected vampires. And in both cases, something weird happened. The first one, the taxi driver asked the woman, like, what did you just do to me? Because she just touched her on the shoulder and she felt something weird. And she was like, what did you just do to me? And that was when the girl in the back said, I'm a vampire. I just took some of your energy. You've got lovely energy and I like to feed on lovely energy. And then she talked and talked more about the whole thing. The second woman, when she was touched on the shoulder, she had been completely freaking out. Like, she'd realised these 4 guys in the back of her cab, like, they're not normal. Like, what are these things? Like, and one of them touched her on the shoulder and she instantly felt this warm honey feeling. She described it as that she was immediately, like, perfectly calm, perfectly at ease, perfectly relaxed, knew she wasn't going to be hurt. And when I heard that detail, I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like, I've experienced something kind of similar to that, and that's interesting. The first time you ever feel your energy manipulated in this way, that you can go from this thundering, like, anxiety feeling in your chest, and then suddenly, like, it's just gone, it's just evaporated, it's taken. That energy, that bad energy is just taken. And it's really amazing. Beats the shit out of any Valium on earth. So that detail really stuck with me. The other similarity between these 2 stories regards their memory, that they both said their memory of the incident was just weird. Certain details are crystal clear, certain details are strangely blurred. The woman in New Orleans, she said she could vividly remember, like, this part of the vampire's face, just her lips talking, she could vividly remember, but she cannot remember the rest of the woman's face, which is really interesting. But the thing that got people really talking about this, I think, and particularly about the second incident, was that she had picked up these 4 guys from an old church where there was like red light streaming out of this old church and music and people spilling out. There was some sort of sinister gathering going on, which turned out to be some sort of gothic rave. So obviously there were a lot of people in the comments being like, honey, I was at this thing. It's a goth thing. You just saw 4 goths, I promise you. The taxi driver then came back and made another video clarifying that these guys were not dressed goth. They did not look goth. They were not dressed goth. They were dressed really expensively. They were dressed how you would like your sugar daddy to be dressed, to quote exactly what she said about them. But I did think it was interesting, the fact that they were probably coming from this gothic event, because both of the Lyft drivers looked like completely non-goth. They did not look like they were a part of the subculture, which made me suspect that they probably weren't aware of the real vampire subculture that is like a worldwide thing, but it is largely concentrated in America. These are essentially human beings. They are normal human beings. They were born human. They grew up human. And there are some of them I kind of believe with this stuff, and there are a lot of them that I don't so much believe. Because what they will usually say happens is that sometime in their teen years or a bit later, they awaken and they realize that they have this need for extra energy that they're going to have to feed, essentially by feeding on blood or feeding on energy. And the reason I say that I believe some of these people and I don't believe others often boils down to this awakening thing. That I tend to have a lot more belief in the ones who awaken away from vampire stuff. So they've basically been like a normal teen, and then they've just started to feel weird, and they've started to crave blood and have dreams about blood, and they don't know what's going on, and they have to find their way to the scene and the subculture and the solution by themselves. The ones that I'm a little bit about tend to be the ones whereby one of their best friends awakens, and a week later, conveniently enough, the whole friendship group has all awakened and all of them are real vampires. And you will be told you can't choose this, you can't make it happen, it's innate to you, it just happens. And yet there is clearly this social contagion element to it with a lot of people. Like, suddenly there's this blossoming of thousands of vampires all in one school because someone did it, someone thought it was cool, and it can be whimsical, it can be very destructive, these social contagions with teenagers. So some of them will go the sanguinarian or sang pathway, and they will drink blood. So they will usually find themselves a donor, which obviously, like, you should not really be out there just being in a club, being like, hey, will you, like, I'm a vampire, come home with me and let me suck some blood out of you. It won't take much, just let me suck some blood out of you. Not a good idea, because obviously we are living in the era of serious blood-borne diseases. So the responsible ones among these people will get a donor who they will insist and they will contractually obligate, like, you don't have unsafe sex, you don't share needles with anyone, ideally you don't get tattoos without my approval and without making sure that where you're going is clean. Anything that can give you a bloodborne virus, basically you avoid, or you run past me first. And you get tested for HIV, for hepatitis, for all this stuff. You get tested regularly, and then they will meet up with this donor however often they need to. It's not usually that much. It's usually, I feel like, the most frequent seems to be about twice a week. More frequently, it tends to be like once a week, every fortnight, something like that. They will meet up and they will just have a few drops or a little more of blood from this donor, and do all they can to avoid giving this donor any infected cuts or is like trying to avoid giving them scars and things like that. The more responsible ones, but obviously not everyone is responsible. And then you've got the energy feeding lot, who honestly are kind of more interesting to me these days, because for them, obviously there is a lot of learning and there is a lot of like technique and a lot of tactics and a lot of, sleight of hand and psychic trickery going on. Because they have to learn, like, their innate instinct, usually the psychic ones, is to basically be an awful person and to stir up arguments, to stir up bad energy, because obviously there's a lot of energy to feed on. If you can get people angry, you can get people shouting at you, you can get people furious online. Like, there's a lot of bad energy in that you can feed on. But it is kind of one of the rules in the real vampire community, like, that you don't do this, that you learn how to feed on more positive energy or sexual energy or just crowd energy. You go out, to a club, to a gig, and you learn to feed on the kind of, transient energy that's just floating around, and no one will lose it. That, there's other rules, like you don't feed on anyone sick, you don't feed on children, you don't feed on animals, you don't feed on the elderly, anyone that it's really going to hurt, you don't do that. And why I say there's all these rules, in America, it's very, very interesting and strange, the real vampire subculture, because they have created in a lot of cities, and as I say, the real vampire community has fallen out of the press for quite a while now. Around about a decade ago, in a lot of American cities, there were essentially vampire courts going on. Some of them appoint like a king and a queen, or whatever kind of monarchical word they want to use, and they have these vampire courts, and it's all very, very American. I think the reason that the real vampire subculture is so much more of a thing in America is because of these like systems of vampire monarchy that they've put together. Whereas, over in the UK and in certain parts of Europe, like, we still have a real monarchy, and we have centuries and centuries and centuries of history and tradition, and that means we're not interested. We're not interested in pomp and ceremony. It doesn't impress us. We don't think it's cool. We're kind of sick of it, and we wish it would go away. Whereas obviously in America, if you're a white person, America is a very new country, which does seem to mean that Americans have this huge craving for this kind of pomp and ceremony and history. The amount of American people you will hear who say, oh, I'm Irish, oh, I'm German, and these things, and they've never set foot in that country, they don't speak the language, but they have this huge longing for those roots that they've been severed from, in being, a member of such a new country. So it is very American, this kind of fixation on having like a monarchical structure and a court and a king and a queen and all of this stuff. It's very quaintly American. But because of all of this, there are a lot of rules. So there's things like, if you go into a new city and you're a real vampire, you should not feed on anyone in any way until you have gone to the vampire court of that city and introduced yourself, and you have to introduce yourself properly. There's so many rules about like the language you use for someone who's like hierarchically above you or slightly below you or alongside you. You have to stand on the right side of them, you have to do this, that and the other. There's so many rules, and it is a little bit strange because the real vampires who I believe more do tend to be the ones who are talking about the fact that what they have is really an unrecognized medical condition, that they need this energy, and they want to be studied. They want to know if there is some kind of better cure than always feeling drained and always feeling tired and exhausted and ill and needing to take your energy in very strange ways. Like, is there some way they could get a cure if it was recognized, if it was studied? So these are the people that I tend to believe more. And yet then you've got this whole thing which if you believe that it is a medical condition that isn't recognized yet, you've got these people who are making this hierarchical grandiose court system out of being ill, which is there are very different takes is what I'm saying. And as I say, it is definitely on kind of a spectrum, a sliding scale of how serious and how into the real vampire thing each participant is. That you do get some who, for them, it's really just a kind of theatrics thing, that they like to have the social life as dressing up as vampires. It's basically just cosplay. For the ones at the very bottom of the sliding scale, it's really just cosplay. They may feed a little bit, but they probably don't really need to. It's more so they just like to live the lifestyle and play the role. Then you've got people who are a little bit higher up, who are more adept in how they feed, and these people you tend to find they've sometimes studied things like NLP, like a bit of hypnosis, like flirting and dating techniques, And they like to portray the archetype of the vampire because it is so powerful that they know, you know, if they go to a bar late at night and they're wearing, you know, expensive kind of gothy, sort of outdated clothes, you know, from the Victorian era, and they're wearing, you know, coloured contact lenses and subtle little fangs that look kind of vampiric, but are they really? I don't know. And they come into the bar and, you know, they really throw people off balance because they're doing all of these tricks on them. You know, they're giving them the really piercing eye contact, and they're being very flirtatious with them. And they know they can get this crackling sexual tension going very easily by using the archetype of the vampire to throw people off and to make them kind of flustered. They're going to get this wave of sexual energy to feed on. And obviously some of them are going to then take that person to bed, sleep with them, and that's going to be one of the most intense energy feedings possible, really, because, you know, your flesh is interlocked, your flesh to flesh. There's a lot of energy going on, sexually speaking. So that will be how some feed. And for them it is, well, sometimes it's, you know, it's just having a laugh, and sometimes it is a genuine need for energy that they feel they have. And I've read a lot of testimonials over the years from these real vampires that some of them, you know, eventually decided, look, I don't believe in this anymore. I don't buy into it. I'm not going to do this. So they stopped energy feeding, and they immediately got really, really, really sick. And they tried all the things. They tried modern medicine. They thought, nothing's working, you know. So eventually they went back to energy feeding and everything cleared up. And I think that's very interesting. I mean, obviously, you know, placebo, nocebo effect are very strong things. It could be all in the mind. But I have read a lot of these testimonials. You also find that a lot of these people, their like lack of energy that they have, their kind of vampirism that they have, it crosses over with conditions like fibromyalgia. And they find that the only thing that really mutes their symptoms and that allows them to live a semi-normal life is feeding, be it on blood or on energy, or both for some of them. And when it comes to like this level of the spectrum of real vampires, I feel like there's quite a big mix of personalities. Like if I met someone who was this sort of real vampire, who was, you know, you meet them and they're immediately putting these tactics on you and trying to get you on the back foot and trying to get you all flustered and ooh, like, you know, turned on and flustered. I don't know how much I would trust that person in terms of like if they were looking for a relationship, if they were even looking for a friendship. I would be cautious with my trust, let's just say that, because I think you've got to think about the psychology of all of this, really. Like, what sort of person is that attracted? I mean, a lot of us are attracted to the archetype of the vampire. You probably wouldn't be in this video if you didn't find vampires fascinating. So a lot of us find them fascinating. A lot of us like to dress up every now and then. But people who take it this seriously and really make it a part of themselves and really believe this is what I like to portray in all circumstances, is that I am this powerful vampiric being and I like to fluster people and I like to get them all kind of twisted up and I like to feed on their energy. That is a big power trippy mindset. And obviously there's a lot of manipulation inherent in this, that you're manipulating people into giving you more energy because you're manipulating their body chemistry and their reaction. The person who always springs to my mind when I talk about this is Russell Brand. You know, before all the horrible, you know, everything came out of the closet, back when he was, you know, just this kind of funny cockney bloke comedian. Think about all the interviews he did in this era and the way he would use so many different tactics to fluster people and to get them on the back foot. You know, he would kind of be too close to them when he was talking, and he would be flirting with them, whether they were male, whether they were female. He would be very overtly flirting with them, using his, you know, at the time reasonable physical attractiveness and his eloquence and all of that. He would use all of that to get them kind of flustered and to confuse them. And he apparently did have training in all of this stuff. He did have PR training in how to do this to people and how to fluster them and how to win arguments by just flustering the fuck out of people. The same damn things, the same sort of tactics that you're using, and look who he turned out to be. You know, so I would have more than a sprinkle of caution when it comes to these people. But it does actually get a lot more sinister than that, because there are the people who are going to weave into all of this stuff religion and spirituality and the occult and magic. And obviously I understand there are people who don't believe in word one of any of that. And it's like, look, if they want to be in their bedroom, pissing about with human blood and, doing spooky wooky things, I don't give a shit because I don't believe in it. I wish I could be one of those people. I really do. I wish I had not experienced any of the things I've experienced and could be one of those people who just flat out goes, nah, there's nothing out there. But I have read unbelievably scary literature relating to vampirism almost as a religion, and the things that some people are willing to sacrifice and give of themselves to very dark entities and deities, things that people are willing to invite into their souls and into their homes and their lives, can be terrifying. And for a lot of these people, I would say it's honestly just curiosity. Like they've watched a lot of vampire movies, they think it's really cool, and they feel very drawn to the whole thing. So they're curious, and maybe they don't have a huge amount of belief in these things working, but they think, hey, it might be fun. Or they're drunk with friends and they think, hey, let's do this thing, it might be fun. So a lot of them are woefully under-equipped to deal with any real world happenings that may come from this. But a lot of the really bad ones, they kind of do know what they're doing, and they want some sort of level of vampiric power in this lifetime that they're only going to get by aligning themselves with very dark forces, which I know sounds like a very conspiracy theorist kind of crazy sentence to say, but having dunked my own toes a good few years ago now into the waters of spirits and the occult and dark stuff in that department, to this day, even all these years later, I will still repeat what I said at the time, which is that my biggest regret in life was that, over trying heroin, over all the dumb things I have done in my life, inviting dark vampiric entities into my life was hands down the worst, stupidest mistake I've ever made. Don't even pursue it. Don't even open your mind to it. But if you're going to, and I think for the sake of harm reduction, I have got to say, but if you're going to, because I know so many of us, we have to make our own mistakes. It doesn't matter who's telling you and what they've been through and how graphically they put it. You have to make your own mistakes. So for the sake of harm reduction, I would say if you really, 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 really are willing to just ruin your life, anything good you have in your life, anything you even slightly like in your life, if you're willing to have that ripped to shreds, pissed on, and lose it forever until you are a hollowed out husk of yourself years down the line, when you have been through hell for years and years and years and years, every species of hell you can possibly imagine you have been through, and until there is just no part of you left, until all the things you had that were good are so gone, and all the things that you even took for granted and didn't realize were good, they're gone too. If you look at that and you're like, yeah, I'm willing to gamble it, you need to have something that I never had and still do not have, which is very strong belief in and a very strong relationship with a deity. There needs to be something far bigger than these things that is going to look after you, and that is something that you can't buy, and I can't buy, because I can't buy it in the other sense of the word. I can't bear to bow to something that has created such a rotten, stinking world. I don't want to do it. And if you're like me and you're not close with any kind of deity, and you start fucking with these, earthbound, dark, spiritual entities, there is nothing that's going to protect you. Nothing. Doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter if you go to someone great and you buy their services. Doesn't matter. It's still going to fuck you up. It really seems to be having some sort of relationship with a deity is about the only thing that is really going to protect you on that path. You know, obviously there are things you can do, things you can learn, and I would say again, if you are, and I have to say, if you're dumb enough at this point to follow this path, do educate yourself on, you know, as much as you can, on as much protection, as much banishing, as much warding as you possibly can before you get into any of it. But even if you are some genius super witch who really knows what they're doing at this point, I would still say don't. It ain't worth it. It's just not. But the point of me getting onto all of this is to say that, yes, there are incredibly scary, creepy, dark things out there in this world. It does get very, very dark, the things that the vampirism rabbit hole goes down to, and it's all on a sliding spectrum, you know, when it comes to the real vampire community. So I would say, if you are someone who is ever going to go to something like an endless night vampire ball, of which there are quite a lot on in the States quite frequently, I've wanted to go to one and I've never managed to make it there. But I would say, if you're going to go to one of these things, like, bear in mind, probably the majority of people there are down the bottom of the scale, and they're just there to have fun and to dress up and to have a bit of a laugh. But there are going to be people at these things who are further up the spectrum. So I would say, you know, if you do know anything about protecting your energy and all of that stuff, please do that before you go to any of these things. And if you meet someone who seems very into you and is very flirtatious, and you're feeling things, you know, you're really, really, really just melting into a puddle in front of this person, just sprinkle a bit of salt on that, and be a bit aware that they probably are into all of this stuff. They probably are using some sort of tactic on you. They may be energy feeding, and are they a good person with this? Are they someone you want to share your energy with? Because I wouldn't say all these people are bad people, you know, again, the ones who feel that it's a medical condition, but hopefully those ones would be more consensual with it and would be like, would you mind if I energy feed? Would you be into this? I feel like that's the kind of person on this scene that you want to trust and you want to be around. Whereas if you ever end up round at their house or anything like this, and you see a lot of books on the spiritual religious side of vampirism, I would be concerned, particularly if when you're around this person or you're around their house, you have a very strange reaction. You know, whether you find that you often feel quite sick when you're there, or you often feel quite sort of shaky and ill, or you just feel uneasy, things just feel weird when you're at their house or you're around them or whatever it is. I think you've got to trust your gut, trust your instincts when it comes to this kind of person. But yeah, I mean, I don't think that's the real vampire scene in a nutshell at all. I think there's far, far, far more to say. And given I'm not American and I'm not a part of this scene, I don't think I can in any way say, oh, that's a conclusive blah blah of the real vampire scene. As I say, it's fallen out of the media for a while, so it would be interesting if any of you guys watching are into the real vampire scene, or are one of them yourself. Please tell me all the things I've missed below, because I feel like I've missed a lot. Yeah, what's going on with the scene at the moment? Why has it gone so quiet? Is it still going along and there's just so much going on in the world we're not hearing about it anymore? I don't know. So yeah, as far as these two women Lyft drivers in the States, it's entirely possible that the people they picked up were purely humans into the real vampire scene who had learned to manipulate energy. So when they touched them on the shoulder and they felt different things, it could be, you know, a manipulation of energy by a quite adept energy vampire. But were they more than that? You know, were they really real vampires, as in not humans with an energy deficit, but something really out of an Anne Rice book? You know, were they that? Who knows? I have seen so many weird videos from the States over the last little while. about supernatural encounters that people have had, it seems to happen a lot if you're like out in the mountains, out in the woods, out anywhere a little bit rural in America. There are so many creepy interactions that people have had with stuff that just should not exist on this earth, and it's kind of terrifying. If you'd asked me about 10 years ago what I thought about this, I'd be like, wow, this is so cool, oh my god, there's all these cool, like, spooky, unreal, like, you know, paranormal things lurking in the woods in America. This is amazing. Maybe there really are like real vampires out there. This is so cool. These days I'm a bit older and wiser, and I don't think it's so cool, but it would be interesting if, you know, Anne Rice type vampires are really running around. And I would say, if I was one of them, obviously America is where I would go. You know, it's a very big country with all this different terrain. It's got all the different climates. It's got rain, it's got sun, it's got everything. So you don't have to get on a plane, and you don't have to have, you know, anyone looking at your passport and realizing you're, you know, 500 years old. You don't have to do any of that stuff if you're in America already. Obviously a big country means a lot of places to hide, a lot of places to reinvent yourself, and, you know, to start all over again when people realize you haven't aged. I don't know, you tell me, where would you hide out if you were a real vampire in the modern world? I mean, because this is the thing, it's like, it's a bit impossible, isn't it, to be, you know, hundreds of years old and all of that in the modern world when there's like CCTV everywhere, starting to have like, you know, biometrics on like everything. But tell me, have there been any other Lyft drivers in the States or anywhere else who's talked about picking up a vampire? Have I missed one, or more than one? Have you had any experiences with any form of real vampire? Are you one of these human real vampires? What's your story? Have I completely done a botched job of explaining what you guys are? Please set me right if I have, gently if you can. And yeah, tell me things about vampires. It's interesting. And with all of that said, I guess I am going to shut up and go away. So thank you for listening to this rather long video on a very, very hot day. Over and out. Bye bye.